Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Caprara, and I'm here today with a fellow poet. We're going to be discussing our middle grade verse novels. I am the author of WORST-CASE-COLLIN. There's a bigger version in the back there. It is a middle grade verse novel, contemporary middle grade verse novel published by Charlesbridge, coming out this September. And it tells the story of a 12-year-old boy named Colin who is fixated on preparing for every worst case scenario possible, everything from riptide to avalanche. And this is because Colin, a few years prior, has suffered a great loss and lost his mother in a fluke accident. And he can't help but wonder what would have happened had someone been better prepared. And so he takes it upon himself to memorize all of these chapters in a sort of survival handbook. Meanwhile, Colin's father copes with their loss in a very different way. His compulsive hoarding disorder sort of spirals out of control. And soon Colin realizes that his home life is becoming a sort of worst case scenario, but one that doesn't come with an easy escape plan. And so Colin has to learn to navigate challenges at home and challenges at school, and not just survive, but also thrive in these circumstances. So that's me. I'm going to hand it over to Irene.
Thank you, Rebecca. I so enjoy getting to meet Colin on the page, and I felt like, oh, this is a kid that I know. I know kids with these kinds of anxieties, and so I really felt at home in those pages. So I'm Irene Latham. I am coming to you live from the Purple Horse Poetry Studio and Music Room, where I both write poetry and play the cello. The book that I'm focusing on today is D39, A Robodog's Journey, which is a novel that's dystopian, and it's about our world at war and a little girl's way through it. She has a lot to figure out, and survival is also a big part of that. And one of her faithful companions along the way is a Robodog. So a lot of imagination, survival, and acceptance. I think ultimately the book is about acceptance. So where should we begin, Rebecca?
You know, one question I had for you, I loved getting into your story. I have it right here. And you know, I wanted to chat a little bit about how you chose this particular form, like how you came to, yours is a novel in verse, they're prose poems. And you have some interesting comments in the very back of the book in the author's note, which I always love, just to see that insight into an author's thought process. Maybe tell us, how did you come to kind of the burrowy, cozy prose poem format for this book?
Sure. So I have a lot of experience in poetry, and I would say free verse is by far my favorite. But this story just wasn't working in that traditional format. And prose poetry is kind of this hybrid, and I've never written in it before. So basically, for those who aren't writing prose poems, they use all the techniques that you would use for regular poetry, except line break. So it just goes all the way to the, however big the margins are, you know, that's how big the poem would be. And we decided to shape the poems in these, as you said, these cozy, like a burrow. There's a lot of invented language in the book as well.
I love invented language. Yeah, that can be a whole other side conversation, but I just was so moved by the vocabulary that you created, and it had this lyric quality. But sorry to interrupt, continue.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. So, so this is a dystopian world, and it wasn't working the way I was doing it, and it just made sense to do something different. Who knows what the world's going to be like? And in this imagined world, it fit to use prose poems. But something I loved about your book, and it is in free verse, and that you used the page, which is something I really appreciate in verse novels, with spacing out of words and line breaks. And why don't you tell us, I'd love to know more about your history with writing poetry and how you came to write in this format.
Sure. So I'd always written poetry as a child, just something I was passionate about. My mother is a poet, so I think sort of that early love of language came from her and watching her write. And then it wasn't until I went to a conference where Kwame Alexander was the keynote speaker, who is the author of The Crossover. And he talked, and I hadn't read his book before. In fact, I hadn't actually read a verse novel before. I'm sad to admit, before that conference. And he spoke with such passion about poetry and its narrative potential. And so right after that, I went and picked up the crossover, and I just, devoured the story, and it kind of opened my mind to the possibility of using poetry to tell a middle grade story. But it has to be the right fit, as you know. It can't just be an arbitrary decision. And kind of parallel at this time in my personal life, we were going through some things with extended family members, and kind of dealing with this idea of the people and things that we hold on to, and learning how to let go, and anxiety and compulsive hoarding disorder. And this idea for a story was kind of like just marinating in the back of my mind. And as soon as I, read Kwame's book and then kind of explored the world of verse novels, it became so obvious to me that this story about a boy who's desperately seeking breathing room and space, it needed to be told through three free verse poems, and it needed that white space on the page. And so I'm glad you picked up on that. And we were very intentional about literally carving out these pockets of breathing room for the reader too, to deal with some of the heavier stuff going on in the story. And I'm really grateful to my editor, Julie Bliven at Charles Bridge, because she pushed me to play with concrete forms, which can be so fun, and said, experiment and be playful about it. And so we did. And so some of the forms of some of the poems take the form of, a house, or just a perimeter, or, there's like little tidbits, single words excavated amongst a brick of words. And so it was a neat exploration, both in terms of the text and the visuals, for me to come to that.
Yeah, it was clear that you were having fun, and you said something, and I think it was in the back of the book, about poetry being a playground, and that's something I talk about a lot, just because that's why I love to write it. It's because it's so much fun, and unlike with traditional prose, and I have written prose novels before as well, you have that opportunity to just go nuts. And for some reason that frees my brain. I'm able to, that the critic on the shoulder kind of is able to hush for a while, and I can just like have a good time.
Well, in your case, you invented an entire, subset of language, which was so neat. And I could tell kind of the playfulness and the lyricism of that coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was fun. So in the book, there are, lots of words that are made up, and there's a glossary at the end, but I think largely you get the definition through context. But for instance, wind is a bluster blow. When something is electronically broken, it's buzz flopped. There's hot season, which is summer, and green season, and so words, putting two words together and using them in a unique way, again, is something I enjoy doing in poetry. So
yeah, I also appreciated that you took this sort of dystopian world, because we haven't really seen that done, in, at least that I'm aware of, in verse novels previously. And I think you talked about, you had seen in a forum of poets or verse novelists, and someone said, could you write dystopian in verse? And you said, why not? And so this book was kind of your attempt at doing that, and you did it, brilliantly.
Oh, thank you. I always am interested in pushing the boundaries, not just for myself, but, for the reader. Anytime I feel like I'm trapped, I want a way out. So I'm constantly looking for, to keep myself entertained, and hopefully to keep readers entertained, to try different things. So I do hope that we see more dystopian, and just dystopian in general. I think there's kind of a hole in the market in middle grade. There's a lot of YA dystopian, and what I kept hearing from teachers and librarians and parents was that, our kids love dystopian, but I don't want to put this book with all this violence and this, this so much graphic stuff in their hands. They're too young. And so I thought, surely there's a way to write a book that's dystopian, that of course those are elements, but they're backstage, so that it's a safe reading environment for a middle grade reader. So yeah, here's hoping there's more.
Yeah, even fantasy. I think we don't see a whole lot of fantasy. A lot of contemporary we see in verse, but yeah, hopefully it's an expanding format.
So I know that, hoarding is an issue, and of course grief is an issue in your book, and just wondering, your personal connections. You mentioned that you had, some family, possibly with that had experienced some of these issues, or where's the Rebecca in your book?
Well, I think we all, whether it's compulsive hoarding or not, I think we all kind of cope with an attachment to things, sometimes an unhealthy attachment to things. I'm a very sentimental person. I like, objects that remind me of people and places, and it can be hard to let go of those things. And on kind of a larger scale, sometimes that can get out of control, and you can see people that you love sometimes suffocated by those belongings and by those memories, and unable to kind of shed the physical and the emotional and kind of move forward to brighter days. So I feel like all my books are kind of these messy collages of bits of myself. It's hard to say, well, this character is me, or nothing is strictly autobiographical. But there are little bits of my life and my experiences and my feelings that always end up on the page in some form or another. This book in particular had a lot of research because because it is a work of fiction and it is different than my lived experience. I wanted to make sure that it was, sensitive, and that I was portraying these mental health issues in an accurate and authentic and not in a harmful way in any way. So, how about your story? Do you put a lot of yourself into your books?
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, how can we not? And I feel like there's a bit of me in every character, and maybe it's not the real me, but the me that I would like to be so brave, or I'd like to be so, yeah. So kind of the imagined me, or the best me, or something, and also the most unpopular parts of me, and in some ways, I think always kind of pop out. So yeah, and isn't that the fun part, to look back, and I'm always interested in reader responses. Something else I wanted to do in this book was I wanted a big surprise. I love books that have like this surprise, and you just want to go and see what it was, how it was built up. So that was another kind of fun experience for me to bring myself into it. It's my chosen experience as a reader and a movie viewer. So yeah, that was fun. Now I know that you do a lot of traveling, and I love looking at your website and hearing all about your travel. So I know that viewers would love to know about your travel and how it relates to your writing.
Sure. Well, I always say that with a passport and a library card, you can go anywhere. But sadly, the last year and a half, 2 years, my passport hasn't been getting a whole lot of use. So most of my adventures have actually been limited to, books these days. But in years prior, I traveled a lot. I lived overseas, and it was a big part of our life. And actually, I kind of credit travel with pushing me to pushing me back to this childhood dream that I had of being an author. I kind of like diverged from that career course for a while and didn't really think being a children's book author was a real job that I could somehow do. And it was about 10 years ago or so. I'm trained as an architect, and I was working out in Western Canada at the time with my husband. And we had these great jobs on paper, but something was missing. And we felt like we needed a change. And so we took a 6-month sabbatical, and packed up like one backpack each. And we set off on a shoestring budget for 6 months and just backpacked around the world. And it was amazing. I mean, I think our parents thought we had completely lost our minds. They called it our quarter life crisis. But it was one of the best things we ever did. And during that time, I always carried a sketchbook because as an architect, you're always sketching. I'm thinking through drawing and kind of documenting my experiences through drawing. But during that trip, my sketchbook kind of morphed into a travel journal, and I started writing a lot more, which I'd done a lot as a child, and then just sort of gotten away from. And then suddenly these snippets of poems were appearing in my travel journal, and story ideas kind of began to emerge. And I thought, maybe this is something I should pay a little more attention to. And my very first failed middle grade manuscript came out of that travel notebook, actually. And I say failed because it never got an agent. I finished it. It was my first complete, middle grade manuscript, but it never got published, which is a good thing. It was a mess, but I learned a tremendous amount, and that trip in particular rekindled that love of writing, and spawned all this, I guess. So
yeah. Well, I'm so glad that it brought you to the page and to poetry. I know travel for me has also been a huge impact on my writing life. My parents were super adventuresome, and my dad took jobs in far-flung places, and we lived in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years and then traveled worldwide before coming home. And I just know that from a very early age, I was aware of this. The world is so big, and I just this curiosity, which, as you know, is such a big part of being a writer. It's just being curious, and just knowing that not everybody looks like me, and not everybody lives like me, and what a huge impact on a writing life. Just to have that kind of worldview, really, to come into books with, and like you, I was also. I'm still a huge reader first, I would say, before even writing. I adore reading books. So it's a big part of my life. So
yeah. Well, speaking of reading, were there any verse novels that inspired you while you were writing this, or that are just sort of all-time favorites of yours?
Yeah, and I appreciate so much. And what better way for you to be introduced to verse novels than Kwame's book?
I know.
What a great start. For me, it was Karen Hess, Out of the Dust was the first one.
Yeah,
I
read it.
I did want to shout out a couple of books that I have really enjoyed this year, and there's two of them that really stand out to me. And one is Starfish.
I have not read it yet, but I see it everywhere, and I'm dying to. There's a huge backlog at my library for that title, which is a good thing. It means kids are clamoring for it.
Yes, so well done. Such great language, and beautiful on the page, and of course, just the content is great. And then there's this one that I'm completely in love with, called The Deepest Breath, by Meg Graham, and it's about a little girl. The feelings in this book are so childlike. The author just really nailed it for what it feels like to be this little girl, kind of experiencing the fizzy feelings of a first crush. And so anyway, it's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. The language is really great. So, but there's so many. We're so lucky. Nikki Grimes is a huge.
Oh, yes, that's another one. I have my stash here. Yeah. This is why I really. Oh gosh, this was just heart wrenching.
Luminous. I mean, just absolutely luminous writing, and through such darkness, so inspiring. And Brown Girl Dreaming was another. I love the memoir in verse. I think is really effective, and it affects me greatly. So. So I don't know, maybe
thing about the memoir that Nikki does, and also that others do as well, is that it lends itself really well to a kind of current timeline, and then being able to insert flashbacks or memories into the narrative in a very seamless way. I think about, there's an author, Caroline Starr Rose, who talks about a verse novel being a patchwork quilt, and each poem is a square on that quilt, and then the book as a whole creates this pattern and this visual and this this entire narrative. But do you have like an image that you think of when you write, or that helps you piece the poems together in that way?
Well, I'll tell you, with this book, I was striving to do something really different, where the last line of one poem became the title of the next
book. Clever, by the way. Yeah, I actually didn't realize that till I read your author's note, and then I was like, and I was wondering why there was this almost like a wave-like rhythm to your poems, and it's because you connected them so well.
Yeah, so I love Caroline's patchwork quilt, and you mentioned earlier collage. I think for me, I'm always writing for discovery. So I'm always just kind of tunneling around, in things to figure out how they fit together. And it takes me a while. I'm not a fast writer when it comes to novels. And I really have to take my time to figure it out. But this one was, I kind of think of this one like, I wanted each one to be an individual scene, like a little bead on a necklace. I was thinking of this beads, and one would lead to the next, and would lead to the next, and lead to the next. And it was actually my editor, Karen Boss, who's just an amazingly insightful editor, who suggested that the very last line of the book should be the first line.
I love, the perfect
circle.
Yeah. So these are things that the readers may not necessarily pick up on, but it's beautiful if they do. And it's things that you can talk about if you visit schools and libraries. And I think it gets me thinking about new poetic forms, and even just hearing you talk about this, maybe that would work for a story, or it's so playful, like you said before. And I think that's one of the reasons that this age group gravitates to these types of stories, because they're playful, and it just as fun as it is to write them. I would hope that it's that fun to read them and kind of explore, and you can reread them in different ways and discover sort of these little hidden treasures, these kind of wordplay or.
Yeah. Now I enjoyed in the design of your book the separate pages that listing out the fears. Now, was that something that did they appear like that as in your manuscript that you sold, or was that part of, how'd that come to be?
So they were there, and then I had another editor who had, kind of been interested in the story and said, I think you should take these all out, and I think we should go in this direction. And as much as I wanted to sell the manuscript, I could tell that wasn't the right direction. So that wasn't, and I'm glad that we eventually found the perfect home for it at Charlesbridge, because Julie really embraced, that and the idea.
It's so hard, Rebecca. I have to just stop you because that takes so much courage, and so to know your work and to know your vision for the work, to say no to an editor who's interested, to know that this is what needs to happen. I think we all need that, to hear those stories, to be encouraged, and to know that our intuition about our own work is something we need to listen to.
Yeah, I think because this story was particularly close to my heart in a different way than maybe some of I do write IP as well, which is, a more collaborative process, but this was like a book of my heart. And just, like you said, there are certain times to compromise, and there are certain times to say, artistically, this is important to me and I'm going to stick by it. But it's challenging, especially when it's a business, it's
that's right. Yeah.
It's more than a business. It's many things. But yeah, I liked interspersing those disaster handbook chapters throughout. I was able to kind of break up the flow of some of the heavier scenes. And then, if you look the last line of those disaster kind of advice, they usually correspond to something that's happened in Collin's life at that moment. And so what the context is a little different, but it's like he's taking that advice in a way.
Yeah, I saw them definitely as moving the narrative forward, and you definitely learned more about him through them. So they completely worked for me.
Well, I'm glad.
Something else I was really interested in your story was how you wrote it. You said that you wrote it in bits and pieces. And I'd love for you to talk more about that.
Sure. Yeah. Teeny tiny bits and pieces. I started writing it, I think it was 6 years ago. And just about, because my youngest is 6, and she was pretty much a newborn, and she would only nap in her car seat in the car. So I would drive around until they fell asleep. My daughter's in the back seat, and we'd pull into this grocery store parking lot, and they would probably nap for like 15, 20 minutes. They were not good sleepers, my children, unfortunately. And I would just like scribble out literally one poem at a time, one day at a time. And I thought, it's going to take me 10 years to write this book. But I was just invested in it. And this was like my time, my precious little time. And, it's tricky to maintain a narrative across constant interruptions and sleep deprivation of having a new baby and all of that. But it was kind of a long but loving process, and eventually this book-shaped thing emerged, and it just showed me that these slivers of time add up. And it's kind of how I had written my first book, but slightly different. But I felt like poetry really lended itself to these 15-minute increments. You can sit and you can write a haiku in 15 minutes. You can write a few lines, and it might not feel like a lot, but cumulatively it becomes something. It becomes a story, and the characters become real, and it's like this alchemy of words that I just love as an author.
And it's so great for beginner writers too. I think that exactly the fact that it's short and it's accomplishable. You can see your thing of beauty in a very quick amount of time. And I think as writers, we put so much in our own way. Like I can remember thinking, oh, I need that chunk of time. I need a couple hours. Well, you don't. And your story is exactly my story too, from raising children. That don't let that get in your way. You can make this happen little by little, like everything else. So.
Yeah. Talk about you have a beautiful section of your website devoted to I think you call them your poem a day or your art speak, where you create a poem every day. And, it seems like just a singular thing, but then the breadth of your work is just astounding that you've created.
I know this started back in 2015 for National Poetry Month, just doing a poem a day, which is, 30 poems. And then it graduated over a couple of years to be a poem a week. So instead of 30 poems in the series, there's 52 over the course of a year. And I take a piece of art and I listen to it. Art speak is me having a conversation with a piece of art. And I choose a theme every year. And it's just good practice. I just love investing in the art and thinking about what it means and going outside the frame and really just kind of exploring. It's still just me having fun. And like you said, now I've got these archives of poems that readers can access for free. Teachers use them for, Poetry Fridays, and I get a lot of readership of those poems, which brings me so much joy.
Yeah.
To be
I
able
love
to.
the visual component as well, that you show readers the poem, or sorry, the painting or the work of art that inspired the poem.
Yeah.
I could just see that being adapted to classroom use, or I run a book club at my local independent bookstore, and I was getting ideas looking through your website, thinking, oh, I should do this with the kids. They would love this. We do little writing prompts, but it's such a clever way to mix the text and the visuals, and
and it's just fun, Rebecca. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just fun, and I need things like that to. You mentioned it being a business to keep me going. In this business is I need that fun. So,
talk a little bit about some of your collaborations in the past. I know this book was written just by you. Obviously, it kind of takes a village within the publishing world. You mentioned your editor, but you have worked with other poets in the past. And worked on anthologies. How did this process differ from that more collaborative process?
Well, I'm kind of a solo person, like I never imagined that I would be able to collaborate with someone and want to and enjoy it so much. I mean, it was life-changing. So Charles Waters is my number one writing collaborator, but I have collaborated with others. Kareem Shamsi Basha, we collaborated on The Catman of Aleppo. And then I have another book that's coming that I've collaborated with another writer. But Charles and I have 5 books that we've worked on together. And one of them is a verse novel that comes out in January, actually, that we wrote together. And it's in 14 voices. So it was quite, and in 12 different forms of poetry. So anyway, it's a beast. It's just a big old book. And
I can't wait to read it.
I hope you will.
I don't know how you kept all that straight in I'm getting like a brain cramp even thinking about
it. It was something, and it's historical fiction. So there was a lot of, the weight of historical fiction. But working with Charles is a joy. We became just fast friends, and we call ourselves Poetic Forever Friends because we're so passionate about poetry and sharing that with others. But we did, as far as what's different, I have to let go of control, which is hard, and I'm not always right, and one thing you learn about writing and poetry, there's not one way to do anything. And just because I like it best, or I think when you're working with someone, their ideas are equally as important. And I have to constantly, my mind works very quickly. I'm speeding through things, and I have to just make myself sit back and listen. And this is good for being a human being, not just in a collaborative relationship with writing books, but just to slow down, let someone else take the reins. It doesn't have to be me every time. So a lot of personal development has happened over the course of our collaboration, and the books are better for it. I mean, just 100% better for it. Somebody, you might do that sometime, Rebecca. Who knows?
I'm curious. I think anthologies are fascinating. I love this idea of kind of interconnected, poems or stories based on a theme. I mean, it's definitely, my wheels are always turning. It's quite an undertaking to organize something like that, which I think at this point in my life, just, given having small kids at home, I can manage myself and my erratic writing time. And, if I was, holding up a whole group of people because of my schedule, I would feel badly, but I feel like someday, we'll be there.
Well, Jane Yolen says it best. She says collaboration is twice the work for half the pay, which is true, but it's also, I mean, you know how it is when you get a book deal or the book is released, the joy you feel it because you wrote the book. But when you share that with someone, there's somebody else in the world who feels it just as much as you do. And there's something so wonderful to share that experience. So
yeah, I often get, I think sometimes more excited for my writing friends' book news than my own. I'm so willing to shout about their success from the rooftop, whereas when it's your own, you're sort of like, oh yeah, I wrote a book.
I know. Well, you wrote a beautiful book, and I'm so glad you read it, and I can't wait to share it with readers. So
thank you. Yeah, same to you.
Yeah. So I think we're at the end of our time, and
it's so lovely. It flew by. I feel like I could, chat with you for hours, and it was such a pleasure. I'm so grateful I got to read your book, and I'm looking forward to your other stories to come. They sound wonderful.
You as well. Let's keep in touch, and thanks to Charles Bridge for putting this on, and for all of you for listening. Hope you find a great book today.